So I had to be careful that I didn't jump up here before I should jump up here. And I appreciated the prayer. Brother Mize, I guess, would be that fella that did that prayer. And I appreciated the singing. Where is the song leader? I don't know your name, brother. Rick. That's good enough for me, Rick. I like to know the names of people that are working with me and me with them in the things that we're involved in. I'm going to ask you a question. Do you know two beautiful girls by the name of Hannah and Haley? All right. Now, I've had the pleasure, Dot and I have, of eating lunch with Phil and his wife Janice, and they're just so mannered, and they're just lovely kids, and I'm happy that you're up here close to the front, you know, and I'm not embarrassing you. You're going to have to get to know and talk and just be you, and that's wonderful. I want to thank you for being here tonight. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. This is a great crowd, and a lot of places where I speak on Sunday morning and Sunday night, gee, there isn't but about 30% that come back on Sunday night. But this is a marvelous group, and I hope and pray that my lesson will inspire you. I thought maybe I was a little bit tough on you this morning, but I had to speak to those that were here this morning because they wouldn't be here tonight. And so I'll lighten up just a little bit in the lesson tonight, and I'll be just as light as Paul will let me be. And in the lesson that we're studying in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. I suppose all of us have some favorite chapter in some favorite book in the Bible. And I'm saying that in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 to 12, is one of my favorite passages of Scripture. And so, I don't want to cry, but I might, and because it's such a beautiful, beautiful rendition of what I call a leader, maturing people in Christ, and seeing that they, such as the elders here and all of you who teach Bible class, what you're doing. Oh, I remember I met a fellow by the name of Jay. He told me his name wasn't Jake, it was Jay. And I asked him to be a gospel preacher. I have a tendency to do that with guys. And so you never know. You just never know when you ask. I was preaching over in one of our people of color congregations in Highland Heights, and I preached a sermon to encourage men to be gospel preachers. And after the service, a man and his wife came up and said, "That's what I want to be." He did. And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "A gospel preacher." We got him Sunset, got him trained, and he's been preaching for several years now. And so you never know. God opens doors. In this particular chapter, and thank you, brother, for reading it, I put in this passage here, Paul presents three pictures of his ministry involved in the church. Now, Paul never stayed very long anywhere. I think probably a little over 3 years in maybe Corinth. But for the most part, he was kind of like I am. I'm a go-to preacher. Wherever somebody calls me and says, "We'd like for you to come preach for us," I go to there. And I think that's something that's very blessed in my life, you see. And so in this, I'll just mention this and have a little fun with you as we discuss this together. I think about, don't you think about people who are really good to you when you became a Christian? I was used to being in a family where every other word was a curse word. Learned to do it very well. Matter of fact, so well that I was rebuked by a fellow who could out-curse me. He said, "You curse too much." He didn't say it that way. He said, "You cuss too much." And so I was working in my apprenticeship. And so I decided, boy, if Kenneth, see, I remember his first name, if he can rebuke me after the way he goes, I'm going to make a change in that. I don't have to speak like that. And so it helps me. You ever thought about what makes you change, what helps you change? I'm not going to preach on that tonight, but you can read it because I will preach on it. And it comes from Ephesians 4. And he'll talk about putting off the old man and putting on the new man. If we don't understand that, we won't do much changing. We just really won't do much, because you don't change by just stop doing something. You put off the old man, he says, and you put on the new man. And been working on that for a lot of years. Been a Christian for over 60 years now. And, oh yeah, I preach from the New King James Version, so that's what I carry with me. And so I notice you mentioned what you're reading from, so I mentioned to you what I'm reading from. 3 pictures then of Paul's ministry emerge. Number 1, I put the faithful steward. That's in 1 Thessalonians 2, verses 1 through 6, where he presents himself as a steward. In verse 2, he talks about we give thanks to God in chapter 1, and then in chapter 2, he says, you yourselves know, brethren, that our coming to you is not in vain. But even after we had suffered before and were spitefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we were bold in our God to speak to you the gospel of God in much conflict. He'd been put in charge of the gospel to the Gentile world. Boy, the Gentile world. Do you know the Jewish people had a monopoly on the Word of God for 1,500 years, all the way from Moses up to Christ? And so Jewish people were steeped in tradition, and Gentiles were kind of a law unto themselves if you study. But God had in His practice, in His thinking, before the foundation of the world, to include us Gentiles. Right. Isn't that a marvelous thing? I'm not a full Gentile. My father was a Russian Jew from Russia. And when I first met him, I was 30, and so I asked him about his background, and he told me about his background, and he said, I'm a Russian Jew. And I said, well, what does it make you as far as your relationship with God? He said, I don't have a relationship with God. All my relationship was with this club I belong to, and so that's kind of where I stand. And I thought, okay, we'll talk about that more later if the opportunity arises, you see. So I thought, my dad, wow, what about that? He was a Mason. I'm not against that. I'm just telling you what club he belonged to, okay? And so in looking at Paul as being in charge or in trust with the gospel in 1 Corinthians 4, verses 1 and 2, he did not make up the message that he had. He did not receive this message from men, Galatians 1, 11 and 12. A steward owns nothing but possesses and uses everything that belongs to the master. Every steward gives account to his master. Luke 16, 1 and 2. And if he's unfaithful, he'll suffer. I mean, we don't know much about that. When I was 16 years old, I got my driver's license. And I worked for a guy, I assume, who was very wealthy. And my job was to mow his yard. My job was to keep everything in order. And then one day he says, I'm going to take you under my wing and help you grow up. I don't know, 16, I thought I wasn't, but I really thought that, you know. I'd strut around there like a peacock until I looked down at my shoes, my feet, and my feathers would fall. You've heard that about a peacock. He had a new Cadillac. And he says, I want you to drive me around. Listen, what I was driving was a Crossley that had been wrecked, that I had worked 3 months for, and had to fix it to where it would go. And We carried our tools right with us, my brother and me. We carried those with us so that any time it quit running, well, we know pretty well what to do. Matter of fact, we could pull the motor out of it in 30 minutes. That wasn't much of a car, but to be, man, I was something. I was something. He'd say, make a right turn up here. Well, I'd start practicing on that before I got there. He said, not too soon. And so, you know, I'm just a kid, I'm learning, and I thought, wow, this guy really thinks the world of me. And he really did. Wasn't a Christian, so I wasn't talking to him about Jesus, but I wasn't cursing either. And I was just enjoying driving that Cadillac. Now, I didn't do that often, but whenever he says, today we're going for a ride, I was a steward that day. I'm going to do what you want. I didn't own the Cadillac. But I was a steward. And I didn't even know what a steward was. And so, as I said, a steward owns nothing but possesses and uses everything that belongs to the master. He was the guy I worked for. Had to give an account. I never ran into anything for which I'm grateful. Might have got close to it. But time came and I had to move along. And he got sick and died. But he was really good to me. I could tell you about a lot of people in my life like that. I went to school at Falling Water Elementary School. We had two classrooms and 8 grades there. Now, you know the teachers had to be busy to train 8 grades in one day. And so some of our 8th graders were 19 years old. Now, they weren't just moving along real quickly. But I learned something from them. Those big guys, I can call their first names. Willard England, I can remember him. He had whiskers. He was a 19-year-old guy. He'd go bear hunting with a switch. But I learned something from him. Those big guys only had one door to the school. We'd come in the front door, and the big guys, I'm looking to see, he's a big guy, Rick is. And so they'd line up on each side of the hall, and when one of us would come in there, one of them would grab us. The hall wasn't very wide. Shove us over there. One over there would grab us and shove me back over here, and then shove me back over there. And the time I got through that line, I'd been shoved around. I wasn't about to take them to war. Believe me, I wasn't. But there was a reward in that, because the skinny guy that I was got to be in the line right down there. So we'd wait on the next person that came through the door. Did you know? I don't know whether you believe in the providence of God. But if you don't, we'll learn about that. You'll find out a lot about it in Romans chapter 8, where he says all things work together for good with them that are called according to his purpose and that love him. And so when I thought in terms of providence of God, in your growing up, men and women, did you ever have people that loved you enough to shove you around a little bit to help you grow up? I can name the ones in the church. We were raised in the mountains in Tennessee. We got married when we were 18. Our baby was born when we were 20. And we were just doing so great, but she wasn't doing so great. And our doctor told us, you're going to have to move somewhere from here. That's where my old cronies were. The old boys that I worked with and all that. And I'm thinking to myself, gee, I'm not going to have any friends. Now, I'll tell you about my friends. They weren't very good friends, okay? But we named one of them Wendy because he talked all the time. You know, all of us had a nickname, and so his name was Wendy. But he was helpful. I ran out of gas one time in my car, and his truck was following me, and he gave me a push up to the gasoline station. He said, I said, why did you do that? And he said, I know how close to empty your gauge is on your car with gasoline, and I knew one of these days you're going to run out of gas. And I did. Well, Paul here, in his ministry, really took it seriously when he took on the position of being minister to the Gentiles. Now, you know and I know that Peter had the privilege in Acts chapter 2 in preaching the first sermon to the Jews. You know that Peter had the opportunity later on to preach to the people that were Jews, that were Gentile, and ultimately even to the Jews in Acts chapter 10, Cornelius, Peter had the privilege of preaching the gospel to them. But Paul was going to be, by the assignment of God, he was going to be their steward. And I thought that's something. Being a leader in a church, being a leader of women, Titus chapter 2, older women are to teach and train younger women. The preacher doesn't do that. That's the older women's responsibility. My job is to work and teach the older women, but the younger women, I'm going to leave that up to women that are older. I'm looking around here. I don't see very many older women. And if I did, I wasn't going to mention it. Anyway, listen to me as I show you Paul's method there. And I noted that he said, here's my manner of ministry. That's in 1 Thessalonians 2, verses 1 and 2. I put he was courageous. He was courageous. Jerry was this man's name. He was leaning up against a telephone pole. And I was walking by and I met him. And I said, hey, Jerry, how are you? Now, the reason that I knew him was the fact that his wife was a faithful Christian. And he didn't go to church. And so he had a big tattoo on his arm there that had a heart with an arrow through it that said mother. And so I thought, I need to get to know this guy. So I stopped and I said, I want to get to know you. How can I do that? He said, well, will you watch football on Monday night? Come on by. I thought, that's a strange thing, but I like football, so I'll go by. Went by. He had several of his beer drinking buddies there. And they were drinking their beer, having the best time in their life. And I'm sitting there thinking, when is it going to be my time? And I thought, well, my time's coming when the halftime break comes. But when the halftime break comes, Dallas was playing and their cheerleaders trotted out there on the television, and every one of them eyes stuck out like organ stops or whatever. And I thought, I'm not making any progress here. After everybody went home and I stayed around with Jerry, I said, you told me to come by. He said, yeah, I told you to come by. I said, I came by, but you didn't let me say anything. He said, I just wanted you to come by. So he said, come back next week, and we'll give you a little time to talk. Isn't that interesting, how you meet people? I still think about him. He's still alive. He's a member at Sunset. Many years ago, I met that guy. And baptized him into Christ after the Bible studies. He taught his own children, baptized all of his own children into Christ. And he worked in the bus ministry. And that's a hard work. He kept the buses running. And our buses, it took baling wire and everything else to keep them going. But we baptized about 30 people a year with our bus ministry, and we kept them. The manner of his ministry, Jerry's, he was courageous. Listen, I'd go up on Saturday and knock on those doors, and somebody like a fishwife would yell at me, what do you want? And I'm thinking to myself as I'm kind of stumbling backwards here, I said, you told me to come. You told me to come on Saturday morning. Yeah, but not this early. Well, it was 10:30. I didn't think that was early. But you have to be courageous, as Paul was, in helping new Christians grow up. He was so gentle. Well, that's getting ahead of myself. Let's move on down here. Here's the message of his ministry in verse 3a. He says, it did not spring from error. I didn't just happen to be a Christian. I didn't just happen to do that in 3a. And I thought, wow, he says, our exhortation did not come from error or uncleanness, nor was in any deceit. No deceit in it. It was a ministry that he had. And it didn't spring from error. And I noted quickly that the motive of his ministry in 3b, he had pure motives. He really wanted to help people. When I preached at Westbury, I had a brother there. Bill was his name. And Bill was in charge of the food pantry. And we'd have about, 150 people a week come through that needed help with food. And, somebody made the statement, they said, Bill, how do you know that they're worthy of this? Bill was very humble. He said, I'd rather, he said it 3 times, give people something that didn't deserve it is to miss someone that really did deserve it. Now, we had a great time there because they would come in groups of about 15 or 20. I'd spend about 30, 45 minutes or an hour teaching them the gospel, the first principles, and then we would serve them food. And we did that for years and years and years. Paul said, my motives are pure. And I put the method of his ministry in verse 3c all the way to 6. He had no guile or trickery. He was not a people pleaser. And he did not use flattery or greed in his ministry. Preachers have a tendency to do that sometimes. So if I come around you and be nice to you and smile to you, I am really not trying to fool you, okay? I'm not trying to fool you. Paul says, I'm not trying to fool you. He was a faithful steward. So people that work with new Christians need to be faithful stewards. We got some people here that I'm sure that's your ministry. Maybe you haven't been practicing it for a while, but that's your ministry, working with new Christians. I met a new Christian back over here somewhere, a mother and a daughter, and I thought it was so wonderful. They were so happy to be a Christian. Part 2, point 2, I thought this is interesting. Look at verses 7 and 8 in that text there. He says in that verse there, but we were gentle among you, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children. So affectionately longing for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become dear to us. Wow. Dot and I sometimes teach marriage material to people, to young couples. And we go all the way back to Adam and Eve. And look at, as God created Adam, Adam had he had an ego. Can I say it that way? Sometimes you probably say, my husband's got a male ego. Now God gave him ego, okay? Now he may not have used it properly, but when it comes to Eve, he gave her the gift of nurturing. Nurturing. And Paul said, I've been like a loving mother. A loving mother. And I thought, nurturing, sure. And then looking at that, well, I thought the emphasis of a steward is be faithful, but the emphasis of a mother is to be gentle. Gentle. Any of you do any shooting? I do some shooting. I've got a shotgun. I've got a Glock 19. And I'm not about to shoot anybody, but I like to go shooting. I'm going to tell you something. Take your shotgun. Mine's a 12-gauge pump. And it holds 5, but it's plugged, so it only put 3 bullets in it. But I can get that shot off pretty well. Take and buy you a can of grapefruit juice or orange juice, one of those big cans about that big, and drink the juice out of it. Take it out on a post and set it up on the post. And back off about as far as this lady who's smiling so well here. And take that 12-gauge shotgun and shoot that can. Then go pick it up. And then try to figure out how to put it back like it was before you shot it. That's a big job. People's hearts, new Christians, from all kinds of backgrounds in life. Sometimes we're just not in the nurturing mood or whatever it is, and we can come off with something that just, like shooting that can, and just shatter them. We have to be loving. And I look at the loving mother that Paul says we, and he's talking about he and his workers there. And so I put gentle as a mother caring for her little children. Like a mother caring for her little children. Paul used his authority in love and care. In love and care. And I thought, we need to learn that again. We need to learn that again. Sometimes we don't treat our kids well. Do you know there are a lot of children that are abused in homes today? I'm not talking about in this church here. Well, there may be. But I'm talking about in the world out there. Children killing children these days. Wow. My loving mother. I think that when I think of a loving mother, I think of my wife, Dot, and I think of her dealing with her grandchildren when we would get the grandchildren every summer for about 6 weeks. I came home one night, and they were out on the bank in front of the house with our new umbrellas, jumping off the bank with those, using them for parachutes. And one of them was a pretty big kid. And when you fall on that umbrella, that thing came in looking like it had been through a day's work. I went in the house, I said, honey, did you know the kids are out there jumping off the bank with our umbrellas? How many did they have? She said. Looked to me like 3. She said, if I could find 10, I'd give them to them. Right now, I need some help. I need some refreshing from those. I noted here that the loving mother, number 1, makes sacrifices. That's in verse 8, where he says, sharing with you the gospel and our lives. We don't read that much. We like to talk. I like to talk. I was walking down a hall in one of the places that I was a preacher up at Sunset, and Dot was walking down there with a group of college-age young girls. And so when they went by me, they all laughed. And I thought, wonder what that was all about. So when we got home, I said, Dot, all those girls laughed when I went by. And she said, yeah, they did. I said, would you kindly tell me what happened? She said, here's what they said. I'd get married if I could find somebody like your husband, Bill. And I was starting to puff up a little bit, you know. And then that wasn't when they laughed. She said, when they laughed, says, well, you look at him right now. He might look like a diamond to you, but I had him when he was a lump of coal. And so it kind of tells you how making sacrifices works, you know. Mothers make sacrifices to care for their children. It takes energy to care for a child. It takes time and energy to care for babies, for baby Christians. Giving nourishment in verse 8, delighted to share with you. And I put the mother gives physical nourishment. She gives physical nourishment to the child. But she shares with the child good things. The United States, several years ago, a long time ago, sent a group of, people are always making us stay, to a place in Africa because it was a place where the children were so good. And they went over there and observed. You'll never guess what they found. The mothers had a little thing made that they hung around their neck, and they had that little child in the front of them, and the child's face was up about where their face was, and the mama was kissing and saying sweet things to them, and these children were learning something from that. They were learning how not to be the wildest kid in the patch, you see. And I noted here, not only giving nourishment, but having patience. Paul said, you've come so dear to us. He says, I'm not only just willing to give you the gospel, but my life as well. My life as well. His love for the Thessalonians was really something special. Something special. And he would have died for them if it had been necessary. Here's my last thought. Try to wrap it up in 2 or 3 minutes. I still owe you that 9 minutes from this morning, I know. In verses 9 to 12, he talks about the concerned father. And I looked at Paul as he was a concern for the new Christians like a father. And I put down here, wow, he's going to have to teach them to work in verse 9. Labor and hardship. Paul toiled night and day. He worked so hard because he loved the believers and he wished to help them as much as possible. His walk, it was devout, it was upright, it was blameless. His life was holy. He carefully fulfilled the duties God gave to him. His life was a righteous life. His integrity and uprightness of character portrayed the practical righteousness that God works out in our lives as we yield to him. And my last thought concerning the concerned father was the words that were spoken. He gave personal counsel, not just great sermons. That's what preachers do. A sermon touches everything. That's not necessarily what's needed all the time. So don't look at this as a sermon. Look at it as me sharing my heart with you, okay? He gave them personal counsel, not just great sermons. Personal touch as well. He encouraged others. In verse 12, he called them lovingly to him to encourage them, not scold them harshly. He not only made them feel better, he inspired them to do better. He comforted them in verse 12. This word carries the same idea of encouragement with emphasis on activity. He gave them courage to keep trying. He charged them in verse 12. He told them of his own personal experience with the Lord. People often take courage when they know someone else has struggled. 1 Corinthians 10:13. And looking at that text there, no temptation has seized you except what is common to man. Ooh. The church did well in Thessalonica. Did well. Paul used these mannerisms. He used the idea of the concerned father and the nurturing mother and a steward. They were a steward to him. I'll close with this illustration. When we were at Sunset, we had ministry in Texas Tech University, and in the church's university, it was just a college at that time, Lubbock Christian College. I'd come home from an elders meeting on Wednesday night, and I would find clothes in the front yard. Here's a pair of socks, and here's a blouse, and you could just trail it right on up to the house. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? But when I went inside the house, here's Dot teaching these girls how to wash. We had a washing machine, but she was teaching them how to do that. Flour was flying everywhere. She was teaching them to cook. They had to catch a husband. And they weren't going to catch a husband if they were little spoiled brats, so she had to teach them how to be older woman sharing with the young women. Boy, I was so happy when I went in there. I just glowed. I glowed at Dot. Boy, you're really, I didn't say the mess of the flour on the floor or anything. I said, it's just wonderful. After it was all over and they went home, said, I know you were kind of thinking that was a bit messy. And I said, well, maybe it was. But you know, today, and that's been a long time ago, 30 or 40 years ago, these same girls will call her, tell her about their birthday, tell her about their marriage, tell her about their babies and things like that. And the fact that we can cook well too. If you hadn't taught us to cook, I don't know where we'd be. We have clean sheets on the bed, they'd say, because we had to learn how to wash sheets. Well, I said all that to say this, that it's a beautiful chapter. Chapter 2, verses 1 to 12, I believe is where I got to on that. It's just a beautiful chapter of Paul using his life to touch people's lives. To touch people's lives. And so, what's the message for us? Do you know the name of your children that are here? Hannah and Haley. I wrote it down so I wouldn't mess up on it, you know. I know all of you kids' names. You're really valuable. You really are. And I want to know your name, and I want to walk up to you and say, you're Jay. Not Jake, but Jay, you know. How do you respond to a lesson like that? I think it's a lesson that you just care to take it with you and think about it. And I think it's being recorded. Buy the tape and listen to it. You'd be surprised how it'll work in your life. Come to Jesus. Jesus He is the life. He is the way. He'll help you. And He was so marvelous in His people skills. Amen. So marvelous in His people skills. If we can pray with you, we'll pray with you. We wouldn't know who you were, so we got some room on this pew. You can come up and have a seat, and one of the elders will pray with you. And that could begin a relationship. If you just want to do better, reach out and touch somebody. That's a good thing to do. Do it appropriately, but reach out and touch somebody. Their life. We sing this song to just encourage you, because you'd be standing up and you'd be moving this way if you decided that you wanted the prayers of the church. Come to Jesus while together we stand and sing.